All right. Hey, y'all. So at any rate, we had covered a great deal of Washington in class. And once again, people are under this impression that George Washington will be some people, not everybody, but George Washington will be king, a dictator. Um, one of those folks that you know um, comes from the military, and ascends to power and rules over people with an you know with an iron hand. And they're finding out that it's not quite like that. That some of those fears are indeed overblown. Um, Matter of fact, we have quite a number of interesting innovations that come out of Washington, or confirmations. We talked about the Whiskey Rebellion, how the Whiskey Rebellion proves, if you will, the validity, I suppose, of the Constitution, right? If you can't protect your people, then what good are you as a government? And indeed, um, the handling of the Whiskey Rebellion proves that this is indeed a valid document, pretty powerful document. Well, at any rate, George Washington serves 2 terms. He is indeed the we say that he sets, if you will, a precedent, right? Because many people are gonna be like, well, hey, if Washington served 2 terms, that sounds like to be roughly what it should be. And then, of course, when you have Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, serving 4 terms, people are like, yeah, I think we better hit it back up with Washington, right? And basically make it by law that it is indeed they can only serve 2 terms, like Washington did. Um, Under Washington, you get now 3 additional states. Vermont comes into the Union as a state now in 1791. Kentucky comes in as a state in 1792. Tennessee comes in as a state in 1796. George Washington might have been kind of reluctant to come in for the first term of president, his first term. And he seemed to be somewhat reluctant with the second term, although people clearly um, were ideologically different from Washington, such as Thomas Jefferson, encouraged him to do so. And none of these elections were at all competitive, you know. Um, but you're not going to get him for a third term. He says that's a wrap. That's a wrap. I am out of here. I'm going to take care of things, um, you know, in Virginia on my plantation, yada, yada, yada. He has no children, so to really worry about, but, he has a wife he needs to take care of. Well, that brings us, if you will, to the farewell address. Now, I have said this before, and I'll say this again. Know this. I mean, I guess know everything, right? You should know everything. But this is one of those where I really, 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 really want you to know, right? What does that mean? So it's gonna be, you're gonna see it again, right? You're gonna see it again in, whenever we have this exam. It's gonna be there somehow, some way, right? All right. The farewell address. So if there's anything you need me to explain and elucidate a bit further, I will be happy to do so. Okay. George Washington is, a military man. Well, I mean, kind of had to be because of the Revolutionary War. He also served during the French and Indian War. But he is indeed basically a military man. He says, be careful about the military. About, giving the military too much power, too much authority, right? And it's easy to do that. I mean, it's easy to give military all types of powers, especially during emergencies, right? A good example of that would be Julius Caesar, who was a military man. Then, of course, he will become dictator, but that's an official position in the Roman Empire. It's not to put him down. That is an emergency position that they likely gave to him because of his military experience. Um, you don't want the military dictating, terms, especially during peacetime, right? You don't want it to overgrow, where basically citizens are slaves to the military, if you will forgive the language, where the military is calling all of the shots, you know, where martial law is now the status quo. So be careful about the military. Don't overextend it. Also, have plenty of revenue and pay off your debts. Well, in order to do that, that means what? Yeah, you're going to need some taxes, right? So you're going to have to probably have plenty of taxes to pay off revenue. To have revenue and obviously pay off debts. Now, understand that the idea of paying off your debts is an essential thing too, right? Because the more you are indebted to someone, I can tell you this, the more and more you feel like, you're practically enslaved by this person, right? You're limited, hindered, that's kind of a monkey on your back. If you will, it may put you into certain positions where you may be beholden to this person, where you might do all types of things to satisfy the debt, without money. Debt, if you will, is considered something to be a circumstance of enslavement to many people. You are tied down by it. So you don't want that as a nation. George Washington is noticing something right now that we're going to see also, obviously, during the Civil War and before the Civil War. He is calling for harmony between the sections. Harmony between the sections. Once again, harmony between the sections. Do you know what a section is? Right? That's kind of like the same thing as region. So in other words, he has some concerns about obviously the North and South, right? Those divisions are there. And they're going to stay there for a while. There are some issues between the North and the South that even are existing at this time. Number of differences, especially the issue of slavery. That is very clear, even in the 1790s. Also, East and West. Between the refined cities, somewhat refined cities, if you will, of the coast and the villages, some cities, but the villages and farms, if you will, of the western portions of these states. Massachusetts, for example, where obviously Boston is going to be considered a jewel of Massachusetts. And then you have, if you will, Springfield, right? Who cares? Philadelphia, a jewel of Pennsylvania. And then you have Pittsburgh, bunch of ruffians, that type of thing. Harmony between the sections. He's noticing it already. Beware of foreign entanglements. So what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is, do not get yourself involved with the intricacies of Europe. Okay, right now, the Europeans are basically embroiled in war. And the last thing you want to do is pick a side. You know, France wants you to pick a side, and that's obviously who they want you to be with, right? They want you to be with France. Is that correct? And Great Britain wants you to pick a side, and that's pretty obvious who they want you to be with, right? They want you to pick, if you will, Great Britain. Do not put yourself in that position. Now, obviously, a nation will need to bring through revenue. A lot of that revenue will come through trade. So trade with them. That's a different story. But definitely do not get yourself into a hissy in Europe, because no good can come of that. All right. Stay away from political parties. Stay away from political parties. Now, you'll see some books, and I'm trying to remember what your textbook says, but you'll notice that some books will indeed put George Washington as a Federalist. George Washington didn't belong to any political party. He thought, if you will, these parties, all they do is tie you down to the loyalties of the party. That you should think of country first, not your party. You should think of the well-being of your country and not what? The agenda of your party. Your party may have you do something that you think is counterintuitive to protecting your country or your state. You're really looking at a guy who's probably closer to a statesman than a politician. To be honest with you. So he believes that partisanship, is destructive. Sure does. I want you to remember that farewell address. You better not have been drifting off. You know what I'm talking about. You better not have been drifting off there. This is extremely important, and certainly important for the exam. I want you to pay attention to that, because you will notice that a lot of what we're going to be talking about, we can go right back to this farewell address. We can go right back to it and check, well, did they do this? Did they do that? Did they do this? You can go right back to it. I am kidding you not. All right, so the farewell address. I think I probably spent more time than I should have on this one screen, but anyway. Now, to be fair, Alexander Hamilton had a lot to do with this farewell address. Maybe except for that stay away from political parties thing. But he had a lot to do, if you will, with this farewell address. Washington based a lot of his address on the conversations of Hamilton. Now, also understand that he did not give this publicly. Basically, he's like, hey, wrote it, didn't just sent it, and then people would read it. All right, hang on. Well, let's see. That is, of course, who? Not George Washington, but John Adams. Okay. The first party system. Right away, right? Stay away from political parties, but these parties are forming. Likely forming, I believe, probably before Washington even brought it up in the farewell address. But you do now have a party system. You see how quickly this farewell address is already coming to us? All right. So George Washington is no longer president. John Adams is president. Or excuse me, isn't president yet. I shouldn't even say that. But let's look at these two parties that you see here. Okay. One party you're going to see, if you will, is the Federalist Party. Now, that party is pretty much set up by Alexander Hamilton. or at least for the purposes of this class, is Alexander Hamilton, if you will, set it up. So obviously, who's that? That's your $10 bill guy, right? The former Secretary of the Treasury. Now, Alexander Hamilton's federalism goes like this. One, you need a strong central government to keep things intact, to keep things, if you will, in order. So centralism is very important. So strong central government. All right. Let's see. Next, you should concentrate on industry, manufacturing. That's very important. What's going to be the backbone of our economy? Manufacturing, according to people such as Alexander Hamilton. He tended to be a bit more keen to the French, to the British, if you will, British line of thinking of government. So he's kind of an Anglophile. So British culture and also probably British government would probably be a better model. He's very much in favor of quite a few taxes, a lot of economic, taxation. He's very much in favor of that. Possibly even a controlled, controlled economic model, probably. A lot of protections, things of that nature. What else about him? If he was to look at the Constitution, he's likely to look at it where you're basically reading between the lines. So, not really a strict constructionist type of person. He believes that obviously the Constitution, the words of the Constitution are important, but also the spirit and meaning behind it. So, in other words, just because something's not written down there per se doesn't mean that it's not constitutional. All right. Well, let's go to Jefferson. Jefferson's side, oftentimes considered anti-federalist. Jefferson's party will be known as several parties. One of them will be the Republican Party. One name for them will be the Republican Party, the Jeffersonians. I've heard of the Jeffersonian Republicans. Later, people will actually call it the Democratic Republican Party. And you'll see people who will say that. Many historians will say that. They probably just pretty much consider themselves to be Republicans. Now, understand that is not the same thing as the Republican Party that you know of today. In fact, you could make the argument that the Democratic Party that we have today branches out from that Republican Party. We'll talk about that here a little later. Okay. Well, this Republican Party says a number of important things. One of them is we like to look closer to the French model, particularly the French Revolution, where it shook things up and it basically said, hey, look, the heck with the, with the central government that we presently have, we need a revolution to shake things up. And of course, I've already talked about how that worked. So obviously, I don't think Jefferson's talking about violence, but he certainly was very supportive of the French Revolution. But he's basically, they'd say, a Francophile, was the argument. So very much into, the French line of things. He believed in the yeoman farmer, Y-E-O-M-A-N, the yeoman farmer. and the yeoman farmer. So in other words, working, with your hands in the ground. These small farmers are going to be the backbone of the economy, at least should be. Now, of course, Jefferson has scores, if not hundreds, of small farmers working for him. so at any rate, it's a little different for Jefferson how that works out. But he believes in the small farmer, will be the backbone of the economy. He believes in a weaker central government, where states have most of the power. He's a strict constructionist, so in other words, if it's not in the Constitution, basically we shouldn't follow it. Let's see here. What else we know about Thomas Jefferson's view on things? Low to, very few taxes, and the idea that we should live within our means. Now, understand something. A lot of what we just talked about with Hamilton and Jefferson may sound a little different, because Jefferson would say, or today we would probably call somebody like Jefferson a conservative, right? But in the classical frame of things, Jefferson is actually considered closer to a classical liberal, because of his idea of, personal liberty, things of that nature, where a weaker central government would be considered a liberal in thought. And Alexander Hamilton would be considered conservative, even though a lot of this stuff sounds like basic Texas being liberal stuff, right? So anyway, all right. Well, in 1796, we have our third election, and this one really will be an election. John Adams will run against Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson obviously being the natural choice for the Jeffersonians or the Republicans, or the old Republicans, if you want to look at it that way. Whereas John Adams will be a more likely choice for the Federalist Party, because basically Hamilton is not in the best shape to try to run for this. It is true that Alexander Hamilton was born, he wasn't born in the present day United States, but that doesn't disqualify him, because actually, if you were a citizen at the time of this Constitution, that actually gave you, was an exception. So he would have qualified in that way. He just had too many enemies. It's basically what happened. So at any rate, John Adams will defeat Thomas Jefferson to become the second president of the United States. Now, when he does that, there's something else we need to talk. We need to talk about something else that's very important. So, do you know how they used to choose the vice president? Well, they used to choose the vice president by whoever the runner-up was. So Jefferson came in second, so he was supposed to be the vice president. Well, understand, Adams and Washington, no big deal. As far as I know, they didn't hate each other. Adams and Jefferson, at least in regards to the ideology, dislike each other. Now, they'll grow very, very much, they'll grow closer, if you will, after their presidencies. But they're kind of at odds with each other right now. And so now you have, if you will, a president and a very begrudging vice president. How is that going to work out? All right. Well, that brings us now to the XYZ affair. Excuse me. So remember when we talked about impressment, you remember that impressment? IMPRESSMENT. Impressment. Well, remember that's the seizure of ships, right? Generally, under the guise of basically you were looking, under the pretext of you looking for soldiers or sailors, excuse me, that may have escaped. But that's basically what it is. Well, understand that not only are the British seizing ships, but also the French are seizing ships. And the French also want the Americans to, to knock it off with the neutrality stuff. And so they go, if you will, so the Americans have to go to the directory. And when they go to the or at least they try to go to the directory. But when they try to go to the directory, basically three guys, as they said it, as it's been, as historians have stated it, three guys basically stood in the way. And we call these three guys X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z basically say, hey, you want to see the directory? You want to see maybe even Talleyrand? If you want to see the directory, then this is what you have to do. One thing you have to do is give us $500,000. Well, it was a different, it would have been equivalent of about $500,000 in our money. I mean, in American money back then. But basically, give us $500,000. And then you're supposed to give us a loan of about, I believe it was something like $12 million. Now, it was understood that this loan really wasn't supposed to be paid back. You may have heard it differently in other, with other teachers and, scholarship sometimes differs on this. But basically, they were supposed to pay them a boatload of money to see if he would have directed it. Now, which is basically in his last year around this time. All right. Well, they come back. And Adams is like, heck no. And Adams, by the way, has a nasty little temper. But he basically says, no, I ain't doing no mess like that. And the Congress says, no, we ain't doing any mess like that. I said, man, forget that. And so what they decide to do is to bring about the Alien Sedition Acts. Now, understand that the Alien Sedition Acts are the product of not the Republican Party or the old Republican Party. Rather, it's the product of the Federalist Party. Now, one other thing to keep in mind, I've noticed this on a number of sites where they kind of miss the point of this. Some miss the point, some don't. These Alien Sedition Acts also have the distinction of not only combating, if you will, foreign powers, but also seem to target the domestic situation that we have too. That is to say, it seems to target the old Republicans, and it also seems to target immigrants who seem to be very much, because a lot of these immigrants are staunch, Jeffersonians or old Republicans. All right. So one of these acts is sometimes you'll see it just called the Alien Act. You also see it called the Alien Freedoms Act. And the Alien Freedoms Act basically says that we have the right to deport anybody that we, any alien, any foreigner we believe to be not having our best interests at heart. This is even during peacetime. So during peacetime, we could get them out of here. Now, this was used mainly for spies, but the idea was you could probably use it for spies. but the point of the matter is, um, that if we think of any foreigners here, maybe French, who oftentimes were friendly to the old Republican Party, maybe Irish, who were also often friendly with the old Republican Party. We think that those folks, might have some shifty, some shifty thoughts, or shifty actions. We can get them out of here. That brings us to the Alien Enemy Act. During wartime, if we're during wartime, and if we're in war with any foreign nation such as France, well, basically, we can kick out French citizens or French expatriates. We can deport them. We can get them out of here, because we're at war with the French. So how trustworthy are French Americans going to be? I mean, people who were born in France and raised here, or born in France and became citizens, when they were adults. The Alien Enemy Act. Then you had the Naturalization Act, and that act basically said, um, that now we're going to extend the period of naturalization. And what is naturalization? You remember? Well, that's basically when somebody becomes, they weren't a citizen of the country before, they weren't born citizens. So you have to basically bring them through a process of which they become a citizen, right? A waiting period, take a test, so on and so forth. Um, well, you're supposed to wait 5 years for that naturalization process. Now it's not 5 years, it's 14 years. And this is clearly directed at much of the base of the old Republican Party. I'm not saying all of it, I'm not saying most of it, but a significant part of that Republican Party had immigrants in it. And it's true that the Federalists did too, but boy, these um, immigrants are clearly a significant part, if you will, of the old Republican Party. And then you have the Sedition Act, right? That's basically when you stir up a bunch of trouble, um, if you will. You're inciting violence, inciting, if you will, disobedience, so on and so forth. Now, the people who were affected by this, especially when you talk about convictions, they all were Republicans. Um, they all were Republicans. Let's see. One of them, let's see, Matthew Lyon basically said that President Adams had an unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice. Avarice means greed, so I think he was going a little too far with that. Selfish greed. What is that? Anyway, they sent that dude to prison. By the way, he got reelected while he was in jail, but they sent him to prison. And there was another one that basically said that President Adams was bald, toothless, and quarrelsome. Another one basically said that they wish that they could take that celebratory cannon that they used, during inaugurations, and basically shoot, if you will, President Adams in the butt with it. So at any rate, these were all, things you could be arrested for under that Sedition Act. Well, this is taking longer than what it should. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Anyway, I'm sure what I'm doing, but I'm not sure why it's taking so long. Well, then that takes us, if you will, to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So we're going to be talking about something later known as nullification. And during the Jacksonian era. Well, understand there's already some earlier versions of nullification, such as the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions um, had some secret authors. The authors were Thomas Jefferson, I believe, for Kentucky, and James Madison for Virginia. And basically, it said that if you found a law or a measure to be unconstitutional, your state does not have to participate in it. It's a matter of conscience. Don't put yourself in that position. Your state does not have to participate in something that they think to be um, unconstitutional. In fact, it's your duty. And so basically, you have the Vice President of the United States telling people, right, not to follow laws that the president had supported. Well, in 1800, you have your fourth election. And during this election of 1800, Jefferson wins. Now, Jefferson wins. Aaron Burr, who was supposed to be really running for vice president, comes in basically tied or second with Thomas Jefferson. They basically they resolved that, and if you were Aaron Burr, will become vice president, which is what he was supposed to be anyway. But Jefferson gets his revenge, and it will be known, if you will, as the Revolution of 1800. And we'll be talking about this so-called Revolution of 1800 next time. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.